Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you might be watching this, and welcome. I am Dr. W. Yusef Doucet, a professor of composition and creative writing and literature at Santa Monica College, and a scholar of culture, PhD in cultural studies, with a background in humanities. In the humanities. And I'll talk about that on another video, right? The humanities. But what I do is write poetry. I have two published collections of poetry and write about culture, film and television, a little about drama, maybe a lot about drama, actually, now that I think about it, and other aspects of culture, right, and discourse, um, discourse in the broader culture, um, and the popular culture in particular. So the title for tonight, I thought I'd talk about race war, right, with the question mark. Um, so I guess that's race war. Maybe about a week ago now, uh, going through the channel guide, came across the movie Uptight from 1968. A reimagining of the John Ford film from 1935, The Informer, that follows, Irish struggle, right, and difficulty, right, with the title makes it clear, right, Informer. And in Uptight, that's updated to Cleveland and the Black liberation struggle, during the moment of Dr. King's assassination, right, during that period, those days, as the more militant wing of the movement emerged. The but I'm not actually going to talk about the film, but the description of the film in the Spectrum guide, right, as the Black militants preparing for race war. And that got me thinking about the use of that term, race war, and how it's a very, excuse me, specifically white used term, something that's been part of the discourse, certainly on the fringe of militant white supremacy, or well, on the fringe of society, but central to militant white supremacy, at least since the height of the civil rights movement, and indeed the resistance movement of the moment, when many of them thought maybe it was about to jump off. Excuse me. So I wanted to share something I wrote, actually something like 15 years ago, when an arch white supremacist in South Africa died, Eugene Terre Blanche. in South Africa, right? And I won't go into the details of his death. Um, you can see barely at the bottom of the screen here the kind of Nazi symbol. Um, of his flag. I'll bring it up a little, make it easier to see. Little gnat flying around. So you can see, right, the um, German fascist inspiration in the flag that he chose. Um, and in a post-apartheid South Africa, he continued, and there continues to be a white supremacist, white separatist movement. So again, upon his death, as he was apparently killed by two of his workers on his farm, who he was notorious for abusing in all ways. And this is in the context at the time of Julius Malema, still at that time president of the ANC Youth League, reviving the liberation song "Kill the Boer" or "One Bullet, One Boer," and so there were cries of race war against white people, against the whites of South Africa. And of course, that's also been that's part of an international discourse of white claims to victimhood of race war, or the possibility of race war, meant to wipe them out. So I just wanted to read from an essay that I wrote about Terre Blanche, Malema, and the claim to race war. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share. This is from my blog, Ignace, freeignace.blog. The deaths of dark-skinned people are taken for granted as one of the unfortunate vicissitudes of modern life and backwardness. The relationship between industrial societies' living standards and the degradation of the world's majority populations hides beneath chatter about good governance and development. The primary beneficiaries of these uneven relationships remain blind to their own complicity in plunder and the frustration of genuine democracy and social transformation. That people in Africa, Asia, Caribbean and Latin America, and the Pacific routinely die to maintain the flow of wealth from southern resources to northern companies, China and India notwithstanding, is an afterthought, if it is a thought at all. That African people, First Nations people, and other people of color routinely die to maintain the flow of wealth from exploited communities in North America to primarily white communities in North America cannot even be mentioned in the mainstream media. People of color are supposed to die. But white people's lives are precious. The US media's obsession with missing young white girls has become a running joke on primetime television. The race of the victim of murder, weighing heavily in capital murder cases, has been admitted by the US Supreme Court. Cases with white victims earning capital categorization more consistently. So when the media begin to express fears of race war breaking out, what they really express is fear of white people dying in large numbers at the hands of people who are not other whites. That is the fear of the uprising on the plantation, the enslaved slitting the throats of the slaveholders as they lie in their beds. That is the great sense of betrayal for the gun runner who sells rifles to the Indians. That is the fear of the oppressing minority ruling the majority with iron boot to keep at heel the wave of resistance that could overwhelm the minority if the majority ever could show a unified force around freeing the land rather than only dismantling the system of exclusion and segregation. It is also the resentment that has flavored U.S. American politics since Nixon appealed to the silent majority who believed in law and order. Law and order always carries a racialized taint of keeping the blacks and Indians in check. So when a cop shoots a black man, that is not race war. And when several cops shoot a young man after his bachelor party, some of the cops also black, that is not race war. Because it's only race war when white people's lives are threatened the way it's framed in the media. Now, the essay, again, is really responding to Terre Blanche and his death, right? And then the talk of race war. Though, again, what the West, what the Christian West has waged against the rest of the world for near on 600 years or so now, 500 plus for sure. So, I want to talk a little bit about that in this moment as reaction intensifies under the Trump regime. And particularly justifying itself around this claim of white victimhood, white genocide. And that in all aspects, white lives are somehow threatened. And so race war is likely what they're turning to, right? What the right is turning to, again, in this fascist moment, in this intensification of the colonial relationship, vis-a-vis the colonized communities of this country. We've already seen the attacks on critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion. These DEI may primarily affect those achieving a middle class status, right, or working in an office in a profession, one of these fields, right? Whereas critical race theory, though, as a legal theory, right, can inform, those attorneys who are dealing, really daily with the working class, Africans who are going through the criminal justice system of the United States, which has been used as really the primary tool for subversion and counterinsurgency in the Black nation, the Black colony, the Black nation within the nation, the internal colony, African colony, African America, here in the United States since the height of the civil rights movement and the emergence of the Black Power and Black liberation movement of the mid late 60s into the 70s, the and through the 70s really. The and particularly that wing of it that took up arms also, and many of the fighters, again, sit in prison as POWs, even if not given that status. Now, but you put this kind of structural attack, the attacks on CRT, critical race theory, the attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, which of course is code for anti-Black. It's all code for anti-Black, but is far more reaching than just African descent persons in workplace, in school, in terms of access. Never forgetting the class character likely with DEI. But this is also happening in this discursive context of these claims to Black fatigue, not the Black fatigue as it was imagined by the sister who wrote the book, Black Fatigue, which is really dealing with the fatigue that Black people feel from having to live in a racist society with the burden of racism. All right, now that's a very particular meaning that has been twisted to mean fatigue with living with Black people, around Black people, particularly working class Black people, so-called ghetto folks. Mary Frances Winters writes the book Black Fatigue: How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. Now, that term has been flipped on its head to decenter Black experience and distort it, to make it a source of other people's, including Black people's, discomfort, distaste, disdain for so-called uncivilized ghetto behavior. And that class character is really important because there is a seductive tendency of middle class and middle class aspiring Blacks to repeat and propagate this insult on the Black working class. However, it must be understood, this flip and the use of it specifically by white people expressing their Black fatigue. In the context of these other kinds of structural attacks, the symbolic attacks that are occurring in the various museums, the removal of names, etc., the discursive attacks on woke and the declarations that woke is dead and all this other stuff, the co-signing that collaborators, class collaborators, Black collaborators in MAGA, but not only in MAGA, also in the opposition party, who again fall prey to this anti-Black working class feeling. Now is intensified through the attack on Washington, D.C., the occupation, and the open call by, I believe, podcaster, YouTuber, I'm not sure, Benny Johnson, that there are neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. that should be bulldozed. This is a call for nothing short of ethnic cleansing. Now the press secretary of the Trump regime is declaring tens of encampments for the unhoused as clean. Is there any word of what's happened to the people? African presence among those unhoused overrepresented? There's a little question mark there. DC isn't as chocolate as it used to be, but I think it's still a primarily chocolate city. But there's still too many unhoused people. And Black people are overrepresented in the unhoused population in every major city, and certainly in the United States broadly. So what's happening to those people? So we have the ethnic cleansing of the ICE raids and this deployment of a civil army to remove people from the United States, remove people of color from the United States. The gaze has now shifted to the cities, to what they call the Democrat cities. We should always remember Democrat cities, blue cities, inner cities, and this is the big one, inner cities. These are euphemisms for Black. So we don't fret, we organize. Organize for resistance, but recognize this language of race war and this language of white victimhood to justify aggressive military behavior requires we organize for community resistance, community self-defense, personal self-defense, watchfulness, and care. Thank you for watching, for sitting with me. I want to ask you to do all the things. Please like this video, I hope you do like it. Please share it. And if you have not done so before, please do subscribe to our channel, the Joko Collective channel. I, again, am Dr. W. Yusef Doucet, PhD in Cultural Studies, a published poet, a teacher, and an essayist, yeah, a writer, and a teacher. A cultural worker is how I typically identify myself, a cultural worker. But we're at the end of this video. So those are two things I'd like to talk about more in upcoming videos. What it means to be from a humanities background, and I guess how I hope to share that, right? Share the humanities and how the humanities can be used and deployed in revolutionary ways, in liberatory ways, and very much related to ideas of the liberal arts and their liberatory aspect, the thing that makes them liberal in its root, freeing. And can also talk about why cultural worker. So at another time. But thank you. Thank you for watching. I say we because I'm thinking of my partner, Tasha, who's not here with me tonight because I'm recording this ahead of time instead of us usually doing it live. But we will be back with you, the Joko Collective, for a Joko conversation. And I will be back with you again. I will be forward to talk, share ideas again. Not lecture. I barely lecture in class. I prefer to have kinds of, conversations. So we can do that. So with that being said, don't forget to comment also if you want to add something or want to share something, got something to say. With that, I will say good night.